Right now, as you are watching this, scientists at the USGS Yellowstone Volcano Observatory are working through a set of monitoring data that they have publicly acknowledged that they cannot yet fully explain. And because this is Yellowstone, the most mythologized, most clickbaited, most misunderstood volcanic system on the internet, we are going to do something different with this story. We are going to tell you exactly what changed, exactly what scientists know and do not know, exactly what the real hazard of Yellowstone is, because it is almost certainly not the one you think. And we are going to do it without a single frame of dishonest apocalypse bait. Here's what happened. Beginning in early July 2026, the ground deformation network at Norris Geyser Basin, the hottest, most dynamic, and most closely watched hydrothermal area in Yellowstone National Park, recorded an uplift episode of 9 centimeters over 5 weeks, concentrated in an area roughly 6 kilometers across. That rate is sharply elevated. Norris has experienced uplift episodes before, but the current one is faster than any recorded at this location in the GPS era. Simultaneously, Steamboat Geyser, the tallest active geyser on Earth, located inside the same basin, abruptly stopped, erupting after 8 years of frequent activity, and a swarm of shallow, small earthquakes, over 500 events, all below magnitude 3.0, clustered between 1 and 4 kilometers depth, has been tracking beneath the basin's northern margin. On top of that, thermal infrared surveys flagged a new patch of heated, dying vegetation northeast of the basin. The possible birth of a new thermal area, the same way the Tern Lake thermal area quietly appeared and was confirmed in 2019. Uplift, a geyser behavior reversal, a shallow swarm, new surface heat, all in the same corner of the park, in the same 5 weeks. And here's the sentence from the Yellowstone Volcano Observatory's July monthly update that generated this video's title. The specific mechanism driving the current deformation and hydrothermal changes at Norris is not yet understood. That sentence is real science being honest, and it deserves an honest video. Today we break down exactly what is happening beneath Norris, why scientists genuinely cannot yet explain it, why none of it points toward the supereruption the internet will tell you is coming, and what the actual, documented, historically demonstrated hazard at Yellowstone is, minus the one that injured tourists in 2024, and that the observatory considers the most likely dangerous event in the park by an enormous margin. No guessing, no dramatizing, just the facts, the science, and the real stakes. Drop a comment right now. Have you visited Yellowstone? Walked the boardwalks at Norris? Watched Old Faithful? Seen Steamboat erupt? Tell me when you were there, and what it was like to stand on the roof of one of the largest volcanic systems on Earth. And answer me this honestly. Before today, what did you believe about the Yellowstone supervolcano? Because the gap between what the internet says and what the science says is the entire reason this video exists. Subscribe right now if you want every Yellowstone Volcano Observatory update, every hydrothermal development, and every finding from this system covered accurately as it happens. Completely free. A thumbs up helps this reach people who are being fed apocalypse content about this exact story right now. Let us go for 6,000 likes. Now let us get into what is actually happening under Norris. To understand why scientists cannot explain the current episode, you have to understand what sits beneath Yellowstone, because it is not what most people picture. There is no vast churning chamber of liquid rock waiting to blow. Seismic imaging over the past decade has mapped the system in detail. A shallow magma reservoir of rhyolite sitting 5 to 17 kilometers down that is mostly solid crystal mush, with melt fractions estimated between 15 and 20%, far below the roughly 35 to 50% melt that eruptions of that magma type require. Below it, a much larger, deeper basaltic reservoir feeding heat upward, and above all of it, sandwiched between the magma system and the surface, the largest hydrothermal system on the continent, a three-dimensional plumbing network of superheated water, steam, dissolved gases, and mineral cloud fractures, holding more than 10,000 hot springs, geysers, mud pots, and fumaroles. Almost everything Yellowstone does, the uplift and subsidence cycles, the earthquake swarms, the geyser changes, happens in that hydrothermal layer, not in the magma. The caldera floor breathes constantly. It rose 70 centimeters between 1923 and 1984. Subsided, rose again, subsided again. Norris itself had uplift episodes in the mid-1990s, and again around 2013 to 2014, each of which eventually reversed without any eruptive activity of any kind. Earthquake swarms are routine. Yellowstone records 1,500 to 2,500 earthquakes per year, most in swarms, driven by water and steam forcing through fractures. So why can't scientists explain this one? Because the hydrothermal system is a black box in the most literal sense. Scientists can measure what goes in, heat from below, and what comes out, deformation, seismicity, gas, geyser behavior at the surface. What they cannot directly observe is the plumbing in between, which fractures are sealing shut with silica deposits, where steam pockets are pressurizing, how the underground flow paths are rerouting. The leading hypothesis for the current Norris episode is a hydrothermal sealing event, mineral deposition choking off a major outflow pathway, causing pressure to build beneath a self-sealed cap, which would elegantly explain the uplift, the shallow swarm, Steamboat's sudden shutdown as its water supply rerouted, and new heat emerging at the surface along an alternate path. The competing hypothesis is a small pulse of magmatic fluid. Gas and brine, not magma itself, released from the crystal mush below and injected into the base of the hydrothermal system. The surface data cannot yet distinguish between the two. That is what "cannot explain it" means. Not scientists are baffled and terrified. It means two candidate mechanisms, one ambiguous data set, and more instruments being deployed right now to tell them apart. Here is what the data does rule out. Clearly, there is no deep seismicity indicating magma ascent. The swarm is shallow and hydrothermal in character. There is no caldera-wide deformation. The uplift is a 6-kilometer patch at Norris, not the 70-kilometer caldera inflating. Gas measurements show no significant change in the deep magmatic signature. The melt fraction problem remains decisive. You cannot erupt a crystal mush, and nothing in the current episode adds melt. The Yellowstone Volcano Observatory's aviation color code remains green. Every scientist at the observatory has stated the same thing on the record. This is a hydrothermal event, and there is no indication of magmatic unrest. Now let us deal with the supervolcano directly, because the algorithm is full of it this week. Yellowstone has produced 3 caldera-forming supereruptions, 2.1 million years ago, 1.3 million years ago, and 640,000 years ago. The internet arithmetic, it erupts every 600,000 to 700,000 years, so we are due is wrong twice over. 3 events do not establish a schedule. The 2 intervals differ by 140,000 years, and volcanoes do not run on timers. And the trend of the system across those 3 events is declining. Each supereruption was smaller than the last. The most recent lava flows in the caldera are 70,000 years old, and multiple imaging studies suggest the system is in a long cooling phase. The USGS places the annual probability of a caldera-forming eruption at roughly 1 in 730,000, minus, comparable to the odds of a civilization-affecting asteroid impact, even Yellowstone's more plausible eruptive scenario. A lava flow, like those of 70,000 years ago, would be a slow-moving, park-scale event, not a continental catastrophe. If a genuine magmatic run-up ever began, the precursors as massive, deep seismicity, caldera-scale deformation. Profound gas changes would be unmistakable on this instrument network for years to decades before any eruption. Nothing resembling that is occurring. But here's where this video earns its title, honestly. Because there is a real hazard at Yellowstone, it is directly connected to exactly the kind of episode now underway at Norris, and it is a hazard to the observatory actually loses sleep over. It is called a hydrothermal explosion. When a sealed, pressurized pocket of superheated water in the shallow subsurface suddenly depressurizes, a seal fails, a fracture opens, the water flashes instantaneously to steam, expanding its volume by a factor of more than 1,000 and blasting rock, mud, and boiling water outward with no magma involved at all. These are not rare at Yellowstone. Small ones happen somewhere in the park every year or two, and on July 23, 2024, one happened in front of tourists. A hydrothermal explosion at Biscuit Basin, near Old Faithful, hurled rock and debris tens of meters into the air, and destroyed a section of boardwalk while dozens of visitors stood nearby. People ran through falling debris. By pure timing and luck, no one was killed. The event had no useful precursor. None was possible. The pressurized pocket was a few meters down, invisible to every instrument in the park until the moment it failed. And Yellowstone's geological record contains hydrothermal explosions at a vastly larger scale. Mary Bay, on the north edge of Yellowstone Lake, is a hydrothermal explosion crater 2.5 kilometers across, the largest known on Earth, blasted out roughly 13,000 years ago Indian Pond, Turbid Lake, Pocket Basin. The park is dotted with craters hundreds of meters wide from steam explosions that would, if they occurred today near a developed area in peak season, constitute a mass casualty event with essentially zero warning. This, not a supereruption, is the scenario the observatory's hazard assessments rank as the most probable dangerous event. At Yellowstone, and a sealing and pressurizing episode at Norris, which is the leading explanation for what is happening right now, is precisely the mechanism that sets the stage for larger hydrothermal explosions. That is why the Park Service has closed several Norris boardwalk sections this month, and why the current episode is being taken seriously without any eruption narrative attached. For the contrast that shows what is at stake, look at Whakaari White Island, New Zealand. On December 9, 2019, a hydrothermal-driven explosive event on that island volcano killed 22 people, tourists standing inside the active crater when a sealed system failed, with minutes of ambiguous precursor at most. The subsequent New Zealand inquiry found that visitors had been brought into the most hazardous zone of an actively pressurizing system, with no realistic escape margin. Yellowstone manages the same category of hazard with the opposite. Doctrine, continuous monitoring, conservative closures, the moment an area shows anomalous behavior, boardwalks routed to keep people out of the highest risk ground, and a public that is mostly kept at the margin of the danger rather than inside it. Biscuit Basin 2024 produced 0 deaths, partly through luck, but partly because a boardwalk is not a crater floor. Whakaari and Biscuit Basin are the pair that define this hazard. Same physics, opposite management, 22 funerals against none. Let us be direct about the practical message, because information without action is just anxiety. If you are visiting Yellowstone this season, respect the closures at Norris without exception. They exist because of exactly what this video describes. Stay on boardwalks, everywhere in the park's thermal areas. Not as a rule following formality, but because the ground beside the boardwalk can be a centimeters thick crust over water hot enough to kill, and because the next Biscuit Basin gives no warning. Check the park's current condition reports before you go, and if you are ever in a thermal basin and see sudden changes, new steam vents, muddy water in a normally clear pool, ground movement, leave the area and report it. Those are the only precursors hydrothermal events offer, and rangers act on them. If you are consuming Yellowstone content online this week, apply one filter, any video, post, or headline that connects the Norris episode to a supereruption, overdue timelines. Or continental ash maps is not describing the science. The observatory's own scientists have addressed this episode on the record, and not one of them has connected it to magmatic unrest. The real story, a sealed, pressurizing hydrothermal system behaving in ways not yet fully understood above the largest steam explosion craters on Earth, is genuinely more interesting than the fake one. It just requires no apocalypse. Final thought, something did change beneath Yellowstone. That is true. Scientists cannot yet explain it. That is also true. And both of those sentences can be true without the third sentence the internet wants to add, because the honest version of this story is stranger and better than the myth. The most closely watched volcanic system on Earth is currently demonstrating, in real time, the limit of what even 40 seismometers, 25 GPS stations, gas sensors, and satellite radar can see. The sealed plumbing of a hydrothermal system rearranging itself a few hundred meters beneath the boardwalks by mechanisms that will only be understood after the fact. The tallest geyser on the planet fell silent in a month. The ground rose 9 centimeters. New heat is reaching the surface through paths that did not exist in spring. And the most likely dangerous outcome is not the eruption of a supervolcano. It is a steam explosion of the kind that has happened before, happened as recently as 2024, and will happen again on a schedule no instrument can read. Yellowstone does not need mythology to deserve your attention. The reality, a restless, self-sealing, pressure-building hydrothermal giant that science can monitor but not yet predict, is enough. We will track every Yellowstone Volcano Observatory update, the new instrument deployments at Norris, and whatever explanation the data eventually delivers. Subscribe so you get the answer when it comes. And leave that comment below. Have you stood in Norris Basin? And what did you believe about Yellowstone before today? Because closing the gap between the myth and the science is the entire point. 6,000 likes. Let us go.